asked to introduce our next speaker because she gave me an introduction 3 years ago, and it was a fantastic introduction. So I was hoping to be able to return the favor. I think I'll probably fail drastically. Our next speaker is Rebecca Markert, and she was an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and she got her law degree at Roger Williams University in Rhode Island. She joined the Freedom from Religion Foundation in 2008 and presently is their legal director. I first met Rebecca via email in 2009 when I had a complaint about a church proselytizing within the Warren City Hall. And since then, we have worked together quite a bit. Rebecca has 3 children and is raising a family together with her duties as legal director. So now I give you Rebecca Marquette. Please give her a hand and warm welcome.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here because I've never actually been to the Detroit area, only the airport, so it's kind of good to get out of that area. But also, as Doug mentioned, I am a parent of 3 young children, so I'm trying to figure this secular parenting out, kind of winging it. So it's good to hear from the Chris's and from other people like Dale who are in the trenches and can kind of guide me along, because I feel when they put up the slide of the 6 different types of secular parenting, I think we're falling on the let's just not talk about it religion spectrum. And now that my oldest is 6 years old, his name's Dexter, is going to school and is having more experiences, he is starting to ask us about the world that he lives in. And I don't really have a whole lot of answers for him. Most of my answers are, well, what do you think? Which I think is also a good way to do it. But last weekend, we had a conversation because we live across the street from a church. And usually we know the church because we like to play in the parking lot. It's this large parking lot, and we can ride our bikes and do a whole bunch of things over there. It's usually fairly empty, even on Sunday mornings. But last weekend with Easter Sunday, it was packed, and there were cars lining the streets. And he came into our room, and he wanted to go look for his Easter basket. We do those. And I said, well, we have to wait for your sister, and he was upset about that because she was still asleep. She sleeps late all the time. It was also a problem on Christmas morning for Santa gifts. But he opened up the window and he said, what are all the cars doing at the church? And I was like, oh, well, I should probably tell you, Easter's not just about like baskets and eggs and chocolate bunnies. So I started telling him about Jesus, and it was actually really phenomenal to explain what was going on with Jesus and seeing his reaction, like, he died on a Good Friday? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But then I said, but there are people who don't believe this. There are people who don't believe he was the Messiah. And I explained about Jews, and then I started explaining about Muslims, and suddenly got very convoluted for a conversation with a 6-year-old. And eventually he was just like, let's just go eat. But I'm happy to get these pointers because I feel that these questions are just going to continue to come. But I'm not going to be talking about secular parenting because I'm not the expert. I am an attorney, so I'm going to be talking about state church battles here in Michigan. As Doug mentioned, I've been with the Freedom from Religion Foundation for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in October. For those of you that don't know, thank you. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is an organization based in Madison, Wisconsin, and we have 2 purposes. One is to protect the constitutional principle of separation between state and church, and then the second is to educate the public on matters related to non-theism. I work on the constitutional side of things at our office, and because I was hired as the first staff attorney that they had in-house, I've dealt with it all. But Michigan is special to me because I have kept the Sixth Circuit, which encompasses Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, for the duration of my career at FFRF. It's a really interesting circuit to work in, and I like it a lot. So it's also fascinating to me because when I'm talking to journalists, national reporters about state church issues, I often get asked, are the problems really in the South, where the Bible Belt is? And I always use Michigan as an example because I can say it's not just the Bible Belt. I mean, the violations there are bad and usually more egregious, but we do get a lot of complaints out of Michigan, and we get a lot of complaints out of California, places that journalists may not necessarily think are battlegrounds. So I've built the team that we are today at FFRF. We have 9 attorneys on staff currently. 2 of them are legal fellows, so they're only there for a limited period of time. They'll be leaving us after 2 years, and then we get a new group. But our team use our law degrees to work across the country to keep the wall of separation high and impregnable. That is a quote from Justice Black in the Everson decision. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that. So these are 3 bricks in the wall and just 3 ways that our team does it, although there are many, many more ways to advocate. So one is litigation, obviously. That's one of the biggest weapons we have in our arsenal, is to sue governments when they violate the First Amendment. We do that in federal and state courts. But a large part of my job is actually non-litigation advocacy, where I'm just writing to government officials and school superintendents and things like that about violations of the First Amendment and asking them to remedy it. We want to do that because it's costly to go to court, and sometimes the law is so clear that we can just fix something without going to court. And we also do education. In my department, we do a lot of legal education. So we're educating public officials on what the law is, and educating the public on what the Establishment Clause means and reminding them why it's important. We want to, especially now, remind Americans of America's heritage and commitment to the separation of church and state. We want to reinvigorate that idea. And of course, in everything that we're doing, we're reminding people of the changing demographics, that the non-religious are the fastest growing segment of the American population by religious identification, and that the generations coming after us are even more so non-religious. So I'm going to go through a few of the examples in each of these bricks, but try to keep it specific to Michigan. So the first one is our litigation, and this is a picture I took of the Supreme Court at a recent trip to Washington, D.C. It's not supposed to look ominous. I just really like the black and white. So we take our court cases around the country, and in 2017 alone, we won 8 of our cases. In any given year, we are handling about 10 to 15 court cases around the country, and last year was a record year for us. We got just win after win after win, and that was really exciting, especially in this new era. Okay. So currently we have 14 cases going on across the country, but none of those are in Michigan. So I'm going to take us back, you might know this guy, to a couple of the cases that we handled in Michigan a few years ago. So everybody knows Doug. He has the honor of having to battle probably what I consider to be the most ridiculous mayor in the United States. He's just amazing. But Mayor Fouts has embraced many religious happenings in the City Hall in Warren. He had a nativity scene up during December. He's hosted Evangelical National Day of Prayer events, among other things. And as Doug mentioned, he contacted me in 2009 about some of these happenings, and we tried to figure out what we could do. We did file a lawsuit against the Nativity Scene, and the rejection of Doug's application to put up a winter solstice display. But unfortunately, in a ridiculous opinion from the Sixth Circuit, which engaged in a lot of irrational reasoning and mental gymnastics, they decided that the Nativity Scene was constitutional. But Doug didn't give up. There were other things going on, and one of those things was a prayer station. And I feel like I'm probably telling you guys everything that you already know, but in case you don't know what a prayer station is, it's right there on the left. It's just a table in City Hall where if you're walking around City Hall for whatever business you have there, you can stop by and pray with these church members. I don't know why you couldn't pray on your own, but that's just the way it is. So this prayer station was set up, and Doug wanted to put to counter-protest it through a reason station. So he worked with one of my colleagues on doing the application process for that, and it was very cleverly done. They basically copied the prayer station's application verbatim, and wherever it said prayer station, they just wrote reason station, and thought they can't possibly deny this. But it's Mayor Fouts, so he did. And we then, this time around, had a coalition, the first time ever that FFRF has been able to do this, where we joined forces with Americans United for Separation of Church and State out of DC, the ACLU National Office out of DC, and then the ACLU of Michigan. We filed a lawsuit saying that his denial abridged his free speech rights, and they, after a while, settled the lawsuit, and he's been able to have his reason station. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our advocacy efforts, and some of these I anticipate will be turning into lawsuits eventually. So FFRF gets about 5,000 complaints a year from across the country. It's really interesting because we don't go out and look for these things, they come to us. So with a team of 9 attorneys, we try to tackle them. Of the 5,000, not all of them are actionable. Sometimes we just have to explain why that's not illegal or why that's not actually an issue. So usually we get about 1,200 per year that are actionable and that we can write a letter on. But last year we did 1,500 letters nationwide. And then I ran the numbers for 2 years because I honestly didn't know what the breakdown was. I knew that Michigan for 2017 wasn't in our top 10 states. It had been in previous years, but for whatever reason, 2017 it was not. So we had, for a 2-year span, 60 letters in Michigan. So for 2017, we got over 300 victories when we sent out those letters. Victories are hard to measure because, as you'll know when I go through some of our examples, a lot of times we don't hear about the victory, we don't get a response, or the person who complained to us about it may not be a member, may just be a member of the general public, or is a religious person that doesn't want to know what happened. And so they don't let us know if it has been rectified. And then sometimes victories can take years. We can have protracted correspondence with these people and not hear for years. So some of those victories from 2017 were actually probably things that we did in 2016 and 2017. So in a 2-year time span, we did have 20 non-litigation victories in Michigan. So this is Menominee, Michigan. This is a band shell in the Great Lakes Memorial Marina Park. Every December, they have a nativity scene. And I have to tell you, you probably already know, nativity scenes are really difficult to challenge because there's a court case from the Supreme Court saying that you can have a nativity scene on public property as long as it's muddied up by secular things like Santa Claus and reindeer and lights and Christmas trees and things like that. But a solo or a solitary scene on public property is illegal, and they do have to correct that. What was interesting here is there's a third option. People can ask the government to put up displays during December, like Doug tried to do in Warren. And because this is a band shell, that's the situation. We suspected somebody asked to put this up. We got a complaint about it in 2007. That was before I was on staff, but I know that Dan and Annie Laurie sent a letter and never heard anything. It came across my desk again in 2011. Again, we didn't hear anything. It came back in 2013. And then in 2015, we have had enough hearing about this nativity scene, so we wrote to the city and requested records to figure out how this got here, how long it's been there, things like that. Usually, they will respond to an open records request, but they did not. And we sent a follow-up letter in February of 2016 saying, you're not giving us records. The way this looks like it's unconstitutional and you have to take action, and there was a lot of threatening legal language in there. And we didn't hear anything again. But then, in November of 2016, somebody from Michigan contacted us to let us know that WLUK, Fox News, reported that the nativity scene was missing from the band shell that year. So they went to the city and they asked, and the city manager said, oh yeah, we've been getting these complaints from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the city attorney said it's probably unconstitutional because, you know, it's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. They also had a policy that you couldn't have sectarian symbols on public land. We think that if Jesus wasn't there, they might have kept it up, I'm not sure. But anyway, they decided we do need to take it down. So that's a victory we found out about through the news. But it's a good victory. Like I said before, it's hard to get nativity scenes down, and usually when we do make a complaint, it's a quick remedy to just throw a couple Santas and other things up. So whenever we can get something like that removed, it's really good. So now I'm going to talk about crosses. Crosses are a different animal. The federal courts are pretty unanimous in saying that crosses on public land are unconstitutional. It's the preeminent symbol of Christianity. You can't look at a cross and not think Jesus. It's just obvious that this is a government endorsement of religion if it's on public property. Of course, when we come across these types of crosses, we have a couple of options. We can ask the government to remove it, or they usually try to initiate a land transfer and give it to a private entity. What's interesting is most of my cross cases, I handle crosses for Freedom from Religion Foundation, and so whenever a cross comes up around the country, I handle it, even though I'm mostly a Sixth Circuit attorney. And most of the crosses come up in Florida and California, which I thought was because of their missionary histories. But within the last year, I've been hearing about a lot of these types of crosses in Michigan. And I'm not exactly sure why. If one of you knows, that would be lovely to hear. But we're starting to see a lot of these giant crosses coming across my desk. Last year, 2 of the lawsuits that we settled were about giant crosses. One was in Santa Clara, California, where they had a huge monument, granite monument, in the form of a cross that was marking the location of the Catholic shrine or the Catholic mission that started the city. And I had written to them in 2012 and asked them to remove it. The attorney at the time said, we're going to wait and see how the Mount Soledad cross down in San Diego goes. And then when the Ninth Circuit ruled that that cross was unconstitutional, he said, yep, we're going to have to get rid of this cross. And then they hemmed and hawed for 4 years. And I think I'm too trusting sometimes because they kept saying, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. But then finally we decided we have to file a lawsuit because they are definitely on shaky ground. And that's what did it. We filed the complaint and they settled. And in a secular miracle, they actually removed this cross. When we have cross complaints, like I said, most of the time the discussion is who can we give it to? We can give this land to somebody else and then it's not on public property anymore, so it's constitutional. But they actually removed it. So that was a huge victory for us. We also filed a lawsuit in Pensacola, Florida, over a cross that's there. That cross has been there since 1941 and has been in a public park. During the history of this cross on public land, the city also built an amphitheater around it because it hosted Easter sunrise services and people needed places to sit. So it has this really religious history, as most crosses do. And we had written a letter on the same day that the American Humanist Association also wrote a letter. We had no idea that the two groups were doing that. So when I saw that they had sent a letter, I reached out to their attorney and said, what can we do about this? We found plaintiffs and we sued the city of Pensacola. In an interesting turn of events, they tried to argue that the cross was a veterans memorial for World War II. But what's interesting about that case is the cross in Pensacola was erected in April of 1941, and we didn't enter the war until December when Pearl Harbor. But they've done this consistently. We won at the district court level, and another fun fact about this case is the judge who rendered the decision was actually part of the JCs that erected the current cross. And he did not want to vote or to rule in our favor. He said throughout the opinion he didn't think that the law was correct, but the law was the law and this cross was unconstitutional and he ordered its removal. The city is appealing that decision, and we've briefed the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on it, and oral arguments are being held in a month. So we will see. It's going to be really hard for the 11th Circuit to overrule that decision, though, because they have other cases directly on point. And in order for them to overturn this, we're going to have to get the entire panel of the 11th Circuit to agree that the law is wrong. It's pretty unlikely to happen, but so stay tuned for that. But so now we'll go back to Michigan. Late last year, I got a call from Mitch Kale, who I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he is the director of the Michigan Association for Civil Rights Activists, or MACRA. And he told me that he found this Father Marquette Shrine. And you guys are from Michigan, you may know that Father Marquette is an explorer from the 1600s. And the city of Ludington, this is just outside the city of Ludington, put up this cross in the place where they believe he died. There's some sort of plaque that says Father Marquette died here, and so this is his memorial. But they call it the shrine. They only started calling it the memorial once we started complaining about it. It came out that some historians say that no, Father Marquette probably didn't actually die there, so it's a monument for something that may have happened. This has a pretty religious history, which is important when you're looking at Establishment Clause violations. If there's a religious purpose to the action, it's unconstitutional. And they had Easter sunrise services at this cross as well. Not only did they have Easter sunrise services, they also had pilgrimages to the cross. The city of Ludington would have basically their summer parade would be from downtown Ludington to this cross, which is right overlooking Lake Michigan. They stopped that in the 1990s. And like I said, before we complained, they were calling it the shrine, they were calling these parades pilgrimages. Now all of that wording has changed. Now I think they're vying for litigation. So this came to our attention at the end of last year because last year the township where this cross is, it's now the township of Pierre Marquette, they had $75,000 to waste and they decided to use it to refurbish the cross. They voted that. So they started renovating it. And we had contacted them after Markert did to say that you should rescind this funding and this is unconstitutional. You should just remove the cross altogether. This is still live. This was only in November, and so a lot of this stuff is still happening. But there was a town meeting, and the ACLJ showed up. You might know the ACLJ because it's Jay Sekulo's group. They showed up to tell the town, this is fine. FFRF doesn't know what that's talking about. This is constitutional, and we will defend you if you decide to keep it. But another group, a ministerial association, offered to purchase the land on which the cross sits. So the township right now is trying to figure out what they should do. Stay tuned on that one. And then Mitch found us another cross. This is the Sack Rider Cross in Waterloo Recreation Area. This is on DNR land. So similar to the Marquette Cross, this has been there for a really long time. It's been there since the 1930s. The difference is two things. First, they've had Easter sunrise services there continuously since the 1930s. So they just had it on April 1st. And that is a big deal when you're looking at litigating a cross because it's evidence of the religious purpose of the cross. But the other thing that's complicating this situation is that in 1992, the Grass Lake Ministerial Association was given a permanent use permit to keep the cross on DNR land. And that complicates matters because there is case law out there saying that the state can give permanent use permits for displays, even if they're religious, so long as they have this permitting process for all of their land. And obviously the DNR has a lot of state land. So we're looking into the permit itself and trying to figure out in state court or under the state constitution if there's any way that we can challenge this cross. So crosses also show up when you want to memorialize veterans. So this is in Alto, Michigan. This is a cutout that we find pops up a lot. It can be made of wood or it can be made of metal, but it's a soldier kneeling at the foot of a cross. A few years ago, the American Humanist Association sued the city of Lake Elsinore in California over this exact monument, and they were successful. The court ruled that this type of monument on public property is unconstitutional, and they ordered its removal as well. So since that case, when we get these types of complaints, we write out a letter and we get a lot of victories pretty quickly. Not always, but the writing's usually on the wall. This one came to our attention, and the complainant also wrote to the Center for Inquiry. So Nick Little and I at CFI wrote to the city, Downtown Development Authority, saying this is unconstitutional and you need to remove it. We didn't hear anything. Shocking.